My baby drives a handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a handcuff.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks, to this Saturday, August 24th edition of the Rock Newman Show. We are continuing the celebration and recap of the 50th anniversary of the Martin Luther King's historic March on Washington. Let me start right now just by saying this. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And it goes on to say, you know, a lot of people have opined about where this speech ranks in the history of speeches. And I question why the question is asked. I don't know if any of you out there in live streaming land around the world, I don't know what your thoughts are, or here in this live audience. But is anyone, because you can't react to me right now, but the live audience can, does anyone in the live audience know a speech that's more famous than Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech? Does anyone in the live audience, you think that there's another speech more famous than Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech? Yeah. What is it? Say it again?
Gettysburg.
The Gettysburg Address. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, the I Have a Dream speech has been researched and dissected and opened up and laid to the side by my next guest. His name is Gary Young, and he is the author of the speech. Gary Young, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So it has been said that on August the 28th, 1963, the great orator Martin Luther King was speaking to 250,000 people, and that he was losing the audience. He was talking policy, and he was losing the audience. That the audience was starting to sort of drift. And then what happened?
Well, the night before, if we go back to the night before, Wyatt T. Walker, one of his principal aides, says to him, don't do the I Have a Dream thing. It's trite. It's a cliche. You've done it too many times already. King had delivered the I Have a Dream segment many times before, including in Detroit 3 months earlier, in Chicago just a week earlier. And they said, you need to raise your game for this one. Now, King that year had delivered 350 speeches. And so if you're delivering 350 speeches in a year, you are not delivering a new speech each time. And as a Baptist preacher, he would weave in, cut and paste, respond to the audience and so on. And he had a number of riffs, and I Have a Dream was one of them. So he's up on the podium, and he's losing the audience a little bit. Things are fading a little bit. And behind him, Mahalia Jackson is sitting. Now, as was mentioned earlier, no women spoke from the podium that day, but they did sing. Mahalia Jackson had just sung, I've been buked, I've been scorned. She was in Detroit 3 months earlier when he delivered the I Have a Dream thing there, and she had loved it. And King and Mahalia Jackson had this very intimate relationship. He would call her for what was called gospel therapy. when he was down and on the road, he would call Mahalia Jackson and she would sing to him.
I'm glad you explained that because you said this intimate.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, not that,
Okay.
not
okay.
that way.
All right.
And he's winding down. If you listen to the speech, and I think it's one of the most loved, least well-known speeches, actually, that people think they know it. And when I told people, for example, I was doing this book, they would say, I love that speech. The thing where he says, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land, I say, yeah, it's not that speech. So he's winding down. He says, go back to Mississippi. Go back to South Carolina. And behind him, Mahalia Jackson shouts, tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream.
A woman.
Oh, yes, who knew? They didn't speak from the podium. Behind every man, behind every successful man, in this case, behind a successful
You
speech.
got a whole bunch of feminists out there, so you better say in front of and beside also.
And King continues, go back to your northern homes and ghettos, knowing that someday this will be resolved. Now, Clarence Jones, who wrote the draft of the speech, and we know that I Have a Dream was not in the draft of the speech, says that in that moment, he saw King push the text to the left on the podium, and in his body language turned from a lecturer to a preacher.
Y'all getting some history up in here on the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets in the Langston Hughes room.
So he changes in his body language from a lecturer to a preacher, and then Clarence Jones turns to the person standing next to him and says, those people don't know it, but they're about to go to church. And in that moment, King starts to extemporize. Now, what we don't know is if he actually heard her. He never said he heard her. Clarence Jones says, I was standing 20 feet away from both of them. I heard her. He must have heard her. Charles Euchner, who wrote a book about the march, says, well, there was a whole lot of noise going on that day. But what we do know is that she said it, and what we do know is that in the moment when she said it was the moment when he changed. So we know it's coincidental. We don't know for sure that it's causal. And it's questionable, and only questionable, I think. If he had not used that refrain, would we still know that speech in the same way? Because pretty much everybody I spoke to from the civil rights movement says it was a great speech. We were there, we loved it, he did what he had to do, he kept the audience, it was a beautiful speech. And almost everybody says, actually everybody says, that was not his best speech. And that is not my favorite speech. And if you ask them, with the exception of Clarence Jones, who has an explanation, did you think 50 years on we would be talking about that speech now? They say no, that was not the speech that we thought people would remember.
What prompted you to do a book on it and just simply title it The Speech?
Well, you can, so long as you have his picture on and you call it The Speech, everybody knows what speech it is. There is no other speech. I mean, depending on when you ask your audience, is there another speech in the world? Every country has their speech. I'm from Britain. Winston Churchill will fly them on the beaches, we'll fly them on the sands. The French have de Gaulle. They're usually related to war in some way. But there's only one speech that people remember. Now, when I first came to America, I was actually working at the Washington Post on a secondment from my newspaper, The Guardian. And I arrived on July the 3rd, so I couldn't start work until the 5th or something like that. So I went down to the mall on July 4th just to see the...
You're from Britain?
I'm from Britain.
I take it you don't celebrate July the 4th.
Well, you know, funny you should say that, because when Americans, when I have been, as I was, attacked sometimes by white Americans for example, opposing the Iraq War, and they say to me, my parents are from Barbados, and then they immigrated to Britain. I was born there. And I've had white Americans say to me, if it wasn't for you, if it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking German. And I tell them, if it wasn't for you, I'd probably be speaking Igbo. My people did not really have much of a dog in the fight on July 4th. So I come to, although interestingly, the rest of the world, Britons don't think much about July 4th, but the entire calendar is made up of days when people celebrate leaving the Brits. The Brits don't know that, but pretty much every day is a day where people kind of say, thank God we got rid of the Brits at some stage, including my folks in Barbados. So I come to the mall, and I'm listening to, they're playing bits of speeches, and they play Ronald Reagan. And big chunk of the crowd says, yay, you know, I can't tear down this Berlin Wall, I think it was.
It wasn't the states' rights speech.
No, it wasn't that one. It wasn't the one from Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was, I think it was tear down this Berlin Wall. Tear down this wall. And then almost immediately afterwards, they play Martin Luther King singing I Have a Dream. And the crowd says, yay. And I thought, how are you cheering both of those speeches? What are you getting from that speech that you also get from Reagan that you would cheer them both? And since then, which was my second day in America, I've been intrigued by the way in which a range of opinions in America have been able to appropriate this speech. Glenn Beck holds his Restore Honor rally on the anniversary of the speech and quotes King by name. When they oppose affirmative action, they use the line, color of their skin, content of their character, in order to oppose affirmative action. The way in which conservatives in particular appropriate King and specifically the speech for their own ends, I've always found intriguing. And so I wanted to look at why this speech. He gave 350 speeches that year. There were many speeches given from the podium. There have been many speeches delivered on civil rights, and he gave many speeches that weren't in that year. Why does America choose to remember that speech in the way that it has?
Do you know the entire speech?
I couldn't recite it off the top of my head, but I've listened to it so many times that probably if you start the line, I could finish it.
Well, we do a lot of freestyling here.
I said probably.
I know. I know, but I think you're up to the task. And you got a very loving, adoring audience. You see, even if you mess up, they're going to love and adore you anyhow.
Go for it.
And now, Martin Luther King.
J.R.
J.R.
Doesn't work so well in an English accent, I find, most of this stuff.
Come on, man.
I am happy to join you today in what will go down in history as the greatest, and then I can't remember the noun. Sorry? March for Freedom and Justice. But as I say, if you start a line, I can finish it. I can't decide the whole thing.
I'm going to tell you something. You need to learn this speech. You wrote a book called The Speech. You need to learn this, because if you were to come out here and done... Does anybody out here know the speech? Does anyone in the live audience know the entire speech? Okay.
Do you know the speech?
I don't know it. Oh, at some points I did.
No, come on.
But, you who wrote the book, I'm just going to encourage you, as somebody with gray hair, Uncle Rock is suggesting, learn it in its entirety that you can say it, because if you would have just done that here, you would have stuck this place and set it on fire. What? And that's part of good radio. That's what I need you to do.
Luckily for me, I'm a writer.
Yeah. What was most fascinating to you as you researched this document?
I'm going to say a couple of things. The first is that the reason why I Have a Dream is left out of the text is really as a result of much of the pettiness that took place within and among the civil rights leaders, which I think is interesting because it makes them human. These were human beings. And there was considerable resentment about King from Roy Wilkins, for example, from the NAACP and the Urban League, because he was the one that the cameras followed, that he always stole the limelight. And so there was real resentment. And as a result of that, there was a lot of bickering about when he should go. You know, originally they didn't want him to go on last because that would mean he was the keynote. And it was only when Bayard Rustin said, does anyone want to follow him? that they decided, okay, no, nobody wants to follow King. Right. But then there was the question of time, that they all had 5 minutes, and Bayard Rustin said he would come on with a crook and he would yank them off like they do at the Harlem Apollo if they went too far over time. And they were worried that King, as the last speaker, could take as long as he wanted. And Wilkins said, if you go over time, I will cut the mic myself. Now, this bothered King so much that the night before, he decided that he was going to stick to the time. Yeah. Come what may. And so he dropped, he toyed with the check, the promissory note line, and I Have a Dream line. According to Charles Oickner in his book, in the next door room to King, he could be heard rehearsing the I Have a Dream line. He played with it, he toyed with it, and he decided in the end that he wouldn't put it in. So the reason it's extemporaneous is because of those kind of personality, those personality things going on. The other thing that I think is interesting, important, and that Americans don't realize sufficiently, I think, is that this is a global speech. This is a world speech. What makes it so enduring is that it's both timely, it speaks to the immediate day and the concerns in that moment, and it's timeless. It works as well now as it did 50 years ago, but also it works as well for the Shia of Bahrain as it does for the Roma in Prague. I was doing a story about gypsies in Prague, the Roma, one of the most oppressed groups in Europe. And I was talking to a man, we were about a third of the way through a bottle of vodka, and he slammed his glass down and he said, we need a dream. We need a Martin Luther King. So it translates all over the world. My parents are from Barbados. I was raised and born in Britain. I was raised on and with this speech. I did it at school when I was 11 or 12 in a town just outside of London. So while Martin Luther King is an African-American hero, and while no one can take that away from Black America, you also share him and this speech, and I think should be proud to, with the rest of the world. I've had calls from Australia, Italy, Germany, asking to talk about the speech in this moment in time.
And so you did the speech as an 11-year-old?
I never... we studied it, yeah.
I thought you said you did it.
No.
You messed up my punchline, because I said if you did it at 11 years old and can't do it now, you drank too much vodka along the way. Okay, you did a great deal of research to come up with this. Our next guest lived the experience. I'm talking about none other than the Right Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Keep hope alive.
And we're going to keep hope alive. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Folks, welcome back to this segment of the Rock Newman Show. We're broadcasting live from the Langston Hughes Room at Busboys and Poets at 14th and V Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. My next guest really needs no introduction. He is someone that was certainly intricately involved 50 years ago in the March on Washington. Someone who has paid a price, someone who has blazed trails unbefore known to African Americans, someone who has withstood the slings and arrows. You know something? It's so easy for armchair quarterbacks to sit on the sidelines and talk about what the players on the field are doing all wrong. But it takes a real champion to be on the field getting the job done. And for decades, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson has been getting the job done. Reverend Jackson, thank you for coming on the Rock Newman Show. You know, we could start many places, but Jesse has shared, he has something that he wants my listening audience around the world and the folks in this room here at Busboys and Poets to be aware of that you mostly or maybe never have even heard about. Reverend Jackson.
You know, Rock, thank you. I wanted to share the context of that speech and that march and the preparation by the government to deal with it. And the memo goes like this, memo of one sent from the government. In preparation for the potential riots and disasters, federal officials feared the March on Washington threatened. All elective surgery in the area's hospitals was canceled, freeing 350 beds for riot-related emergencies. 1,900 of Washington's 2,900 police officers worked 18-hour overtime shifts instead of their normal 8 hours. Police plotted 72 potential disaster scenarios and planned a response to each one. In the event of a riot, a policeman or National Guardsman would be stationed on every street corner in downtown Washington's business district to guard against looters. They deployed 200 scout cars, 86 motorcycles, 20 jeeps, several police helicopters, and 23 cranes to move broken down or disabled buses. Local judges were placed on round-the-clock standby. 350 inmates were evacuated from district's jails to create space for disruptive protesters. 2,400 National Guardsmen were sworn in as special officers and given temporary arrest powers. The Guard made over 100 doctors and nurses available. Government offices were shut down. Liquor sales were banned for the first time since Prohibition. On the day of the march, the District of Columbia was placed under virtual martial law. President Kennedy ordered the biggest peacetime military buildup in American history. 5 military bases on the Capitol's outskirts were bursting with activity and heavily armed. 4,000-strong task force prepared for development at Fort Myer, Fort Belvoir, Fort Meade, Quantico Marine Base, and the Anacostia Naval Station. 30 helicopters were flown in to provide airlift capacity. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 15,000 Special Forces troops were placed on standby. 150 agents were assigned to mingle with the crowds, 150. Missing from this human and mechanical arsenal were police dogs. Washington's 69 police dogs remained in their kennels on the orders of Robert Kennedy to avoid a repetition of the ugly images of Birmingham. And Washington canceled its long-standing policy of allowing white officers to bar black policemen from their squad cars. And the administration stations an official just at the right time at the Lincoln Memorial with a cutoff switch and a record turntable. If militant protesters overran the speaker's platform, the sound feed to the loudspeakers would be cut off and placed by a recording of Mahalia Jackson singing, "He's Got the Whole World in His Hands." That was the preparation for the march in 1963, which shows the context of a D.C. with an appointed mayor, not even to vote to elect somebody who can't vote at that time. At that time, Rock, from Texas across to Florida up to Maryland, we couldn't use a single public toilet. Black soldiers had to sit behind Nazi prisoners of war on American military bases. We couldn't buy ice cream at Howard Johnson nor rent a hotel room at Holiday Inn. There were no black jurors in the South because there were no black voters in the South. And so in that day, the dream was about dignity overriding barbarism. That was the context of that speech. A different speech than the dream in 64 for a public accommodations bill to make that illegal. Different than the dream in 65 for the right to vote. Different than the dream in 66 for fair housing in Chicago. Different than the dream in 67 for a poor people's campaign to end the war in Vietnam, because he felt money was going to war and poverty was going to war in Vietnam. So his last campaign speech was to be at Washington Memorial, at Lincoln Memorial, but we'd already built Resurrection City, led by Walter Fauntroy. We had the whole area between Lincoln Memorial and the end of the basin with tents and shanties and shacks. We put together a multiracial, multicultural group to show poverty in America. And so when the president come out his back door to Congress, he could not miss the issue of poverty. So while I am interested in the speech in August 28, 1963, that was a moment of ecstasy, but really it takes us to Memphis, the moment of agony. And if we still were dreaming, we're still up here in the clouds someplace, but Memphis takes us to the garbage worker.
Yeah.
It takes us to poverty. It takes us to drones. It takes us to war policy. It takes us to Martin Luther King. The issue is not where he was born in Atlanta. He had nothing to do with that. No, the moment of ecstasy in Washington. But in the end, it is the suffering and sacrifice of Memphis that tells the real story.
Martin Luther King spoke out boldly at Riverside Baptist.
April 4th,
in
67.
New York City. Mm-hmm. Do you feel as if that speech contributed to a shift in how King was viewed by the federal government?
Well, yes, but that was a series. I mean, his taking on Southern segregationist culture sponsored by the U.S. government. After all, the U.S. senators and congresspeople were sponsors of the segregated South. So that was not outside the government's realm. So winning the Montgomery bus boycott, which validated the power of the 54th Supreme Court decision, got his house bombed, for example. Got him on the FBI hit list where Hoover said he was perhaps the most dangerous man in America. And that if there were some kind of attack, he'd be one of the first 100 to be put on the arrest for a threat to national security. And when Turner Goodman Cheney was killed, and he said the FBI was not doing their job to try to find who killed him, Hoover called him a damn liar. And he was a communist. That triggered Robert Kennedy permitting Hoover to tap his house phone, car phone, office phone in all hotel rooms. So he was operating on that kind of surveillance. And when he received the Nobel Peace Prize, Hoover did a memo saying that if you receive it, we have enough wiretaps on you to expose you, so you must turn down the Nobel Peace Prize. He refused to do so. That was a very different kind of pressure than we hear about ordinarily lived under.
What I told a young brother who was before you, who came before you, that he did a lot of research on the speech. Jesse Jackson lived the experience. Can you reflect and share what might have been your greatest moment of fear during those days?
Well, I was arrested July 1960 trying to use the public library, which scared my parents more than it scared me. And then
Was that in Greensboro?
In Greenville, South Carolina.
Greenville, South Carolina.
But then Greensboro in 1963, June the 5th, and Rick Evers was killed June the 12th. And then the McBarch in Detroit, then the speech in Washington, then within a month, September 15th, the Birmingham bombing, and then John Kennedy killed November 22nd. There was a season of terrorist attacks against the civil rights movement from the president on down to Medgar Evers. And so this was a season, the speech was a part of a season of rebellion and violent reaction by the right wing in this country. And so I kind of put it in that context. I think what he had given some parts of I Have a Dream in Rocky Mount, North Carolina at some point, another part in Detroit in June. They did a big march led by Reverend C.L. Franklin, and ministers tried to find their way and their rhythm into a given speech. It was not the first time he had uttered those words. But I think the speech that has most meaning to me in that sense was the weekend before he was killed. On a Friday night, he called for a staff meeting. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. Reverend Abernathy called, said, Martin, I'm going to meet with you the next morning. Well, I didn't want to go because we had something planned for Saturday morning, a breadbasket meeting in Chicago. And Bevel was in Chicago, and someone else, I think, was in Cincinnati. The rep said, he really wants to see you, so you must come to the meeting. So I said, well, I'll come to the meeting. We really didn't want to go, so we got to the airport for a 7 o'clock plane, and we barely missed it. Said, Reverend Abernathy, we can't make it to the meeting because we missed a 7 o'clock plane. He said, I knew y'all were going to do that, so I have you on a 7:35 plane. That's how we ended up getting to the meeting. And he said, for the last 4 days, I've had a migraine headache. That
This is Dr. King then.
That with my wife Coretta and Ralph and his wife Juanita, and then Jean, and I have gone deeply into my consciousness. I'm under attack by the government, by the press, by my own former Morehouse classmates on attack. Members of my board have leaked letters to the press attacking my going to Washington, attacking the war in Vietnam. And maybe I should just quit. Maybe I've done as much as I can do in 13 years. We won the boycott. We got 6 full accommodations. We got the right to vote. Maybe I've done as much as I can. Maybe I can just go and become president of Morehouse and write and travel some. Maybe that's what I should do. I remember Andy Young saying, it was early in the morning, saying, Doc, please don't talk that way. And he said, well, Andy, don't say peace, peace, where there is no peace. Let me talk. And he said, sometimes I feel so all alone. And he said, I thought maybe our movement, Rap and Stokely, Floyd McKissick, and all the Robert Wilkins and Whitney, we're all friends, and we disagree sometimes on strategy. Maybe if I would fast to the point of death, to at least come to my bedside before I would die, just we could have prayer and regroup our struggle and heal our wounds. And it was a very quiet meeting at that time. He then said, we're going to turn the minus into a plus. Like we came out of Albany, Georgia, we're going on to stop by Memphis to deal with these garbage workers and their flight. On to Washington, maybe to Washington we'll engage in civil disobedience. Maybe we will disrupt traffic, but we will force the country to deal with the choice between war in Vietnam and war in poverty at home. He just talked himself out of that depression. Well, that's like Jesus' 3 moods. One, let this cup pass from me. As he prayed, disciples slept, and then not my will but thine be done. I watched those 3 moods going into Memphis, and so I am at least as concerned, not so much about where he was born and the extra speech in Washington, but the moments of agony as he struggled with being under so much attack, as he sought to shift our priorities from bombing abroad to bread at home. And if we hook up where he left off, we will not pick up on the dream, we pick up on the broken promise. So far as I remember in talking to him about the dream, he thought about it. He said that I dream of a day when we will honor the broken promise. It was very systematic. Lincoln in your majestic shadows, you promised with the Emancipation Proclamation. We have the proclamation without the Emancipation. 100 years ago, you promised. And it's Congress, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, you promised. And here we are, David, the promise through a note bound, strict marking sufficient funds. I dream of a day when we will honor the broken promise. The idea about the 4 little children at theme park, we couldn't, in the South, we couldn't go to the theme parks. We couldn't go to the zoo. No matter what your desire was to see a monkey or a giraffe or an elephant, you could. He said, I hope one day my kids can go to the park and we judge on the content of their character and not just their color, because color was an automatic say no. So the context of that was much more narrow, I think, than it's expanded to be across the years. And so as we went to Memphis to fight for those workers, little did we know that we were moving toward a very tense moment, and in real sense, the very last moments.
What impact did he most have on you personally, Jesse Jackson, as a man?
Well, I can never stop. I can never retire. I will give my last full measure, whether it is through just giving out rather than rust out, in some violent way, because I live a rather risky life. But one cannot retire because he didn't retire. And to do anything less than your best would be to let him down. And I feel a keen sense of obligation to him. And almost every day, in some way, I'm about to do something, about to make some move. I think, what would he think about that? What would be his judgment? Whether I'm right or wrong, it's kind of in my consciousness. The times I've grown to bring Americans home from foreign jails, whether going to get the good men from Syria, or going to Cuba, Iraq, or Yugoslavia, or going to the Gambia, the sense of audacity, believe that the African-American struggle has moral authority around the world, just as that speech does. That comes from being in the King tradition. He just believed that he had the light that was shining in any dark place anywhere in the world, and those around him kind of believed we had that power because he had it.
The tagline of the Rock Newman Show is, "We are one," and we will attempt from this table to try to affect that dream, to try to affect, in our little way, to promote that theory and hope that we get to that reality someday. So far be it from me to want to in any way diminish any of the good that was today, August the 24th, 2013. I make an observation. This is my personal observation, that the commitment that you have made, the life that you have lived, that you deserved today, for example, today. I don't want to get into any cults of personality, but you deserve today the most prominent role to be played if we're talking about the 50th anniversary of and the celebration of the Martin Luther King speech on Washington. Do you have any feelings at all that perhaps you were not given the respect due you for the lifetime of commitment that you've made?
I'm not sure that it matters as much as some people think it should. You know, when I brought Goodman from Syria, who was down, and I did not know him, and going to Syria was quite a risk at that time, and brought the Americans, 40 of them home from Cuba and several hundred from Iraq, and then Yugoslavia, and then from the Gambia. Only one ever sent a letter of thanks. Never did either one ever send a Christmas card to our family. But I would do it again, because it is by grace, not by thanks, that we must move. We must act. And in the end, it is your efforts and grace that should sustain you, not thanks. And that's how I kind of appropriate that. And I try to take a step back from certain of the positioning issues that people find they must take. what matters to me the most about today is the message, no matter who the messenger may be. That is to say, that we must not come to Washington at this time, given what's happening to us, for reflection, mere reflection and motivation, but for legislation and for appropriation and for enforced civil rights law. 31 cities with 40% or more black males jobless. 50% plus black males jobless. We need investment and appropriation, not motivation. We're already motivated and we're unemployed. In New York, around 52% plus black males jobless. So they don't need to stop and frisk, they need to stop and employ. Stop and have a job, stop and educate, stop and house. And so if the
stop some of those thugs down on Wall Street.
Stop that, so that, and stop foreclosing people's homes and the banks make money robbing people. And so if the message gets through, if one message is they came, they reflected on the speech of 1963, all right? And they're motivated to go back home and do something, then it's like vapor. If they came and said that blacks are number one in politics in the White House, but we're number one in infant mortality, number one in short life expectancy, number one in lack of college education, in the criminal justice system, 2.5 million Americans in prison, and blacks, over half of that. That two investment companies make $1.5 billion a year off of prison, collect telephone calls. The increasing prison labor is becoming accepted. And there are some kids in jail 4 and 5 years for pretrial detention. If we address that, it doesn't matter to me who does the addressing, but that has to be addressed for us to be relevant in these times.
President Barack Hussein Obama is scheduled to speak on Wednesday. Are you satisfied or dissatisfied for the impact or lack thereof that he has had on African American life, if we can isolate that for a moment?
Well, let's see Wednesday what will happen after the march as he stands where Dr. King stood along with President Jimmy Carter and President Bill Clinton. I think to compare President Barack Obama, what he might say what Dr. King said is the wrong comparison. Compare him with what Lyndon Johnson said, a president. Compare him with presidents, not with preacher prophets. Mm-hmm. It was Johnson who gave the speech in 1965 at Howard University, where he gave an analysis of the black predicament. Well, Lyndon Johnson argued, if blacks had been in slavery for 246 years, and in Jim Crow for 100 years, for blacks to hit the ground in equal to white people is unrealistic. That was part of his analysis. He said, therefore, we need a civil rights commission. We need legislation, appropriation, so blacks can have equal outcomes. I mean, that is a presidential speech. And we had some good sermonic expressions today and motivation speeches by ministers and officials. I hope he will address the issue of appropriation and legislation. In Chicago, where they talk about the killings on the white side of town, there's 4.7% unemployment. The black side of town, there's 40% unemployment. And they've cut public transportation. You're on welfare, you can't own private transportation. They've closed bus stops, they've closed post offices, they've closed trauma units at hospitals. We need, therefore, three things, at least three things. One, the constitutional right to vote. So states like North Carolina and Texas can't put it back in the states and take it back. We need the revival of the war on poverty. We need student loan debt forgiveness as a stimulus. And we need to commit to end these unnecessary wars. I mean, we need something of the substance that takes us to a higher place. And I hope that happens. I'll be anxiously waiting.
You're famous for your phrase, keep hope alive.
Oh, boy.
You keeping hope alive?
I am. You know, we were in the 88 campaign, and we were doing reasonably well beyond many expectations. And we were supposed to, we thought, run a fairly good race in New York. Maybe we could have won But Gore got out the race. It had been a three-person race. We could have won New York, but they got him to pull back. So Bill Cox and I ran heads up. He had a big budget, and I didn't. I had a poor campaign, the rich message. He had a poor message and rich campaign. So, and so that happened. And then many people felt once we had lost New York, we should just give up and don't go any further because technically we cannot win. I said, the people in Pennsylvania don't have a chance to vote yet, or in California. So we got to keep hope alive. The only thing we got going for us is hope. When you stop hoping, you stop hopping. And if people take your hope, it's like taking the juice out your grape and nothing left but a raisin. You got to have the power to hope. In the most difficult situations, you got to fight for hope no matter what the odds are. And hope is a stimulus for me.
Hope is the stimulus.
It's a stimulus.
Yeah. Where do you go from here? What's your greatest focus as you leave Washington, go back to Chicago or wherever you might go? What's most urgent to you?
The most urgent right now is since all rights are preserved by the vote, unless the president moves rather quickly and convene this Congress and fight, we don't have the constitutional right to vote. We have the state's right to vote. We have the federal government stopped discrimination in voting 15th Amendment. You have the constitutional right to bear arms, but not to vote. That's why when Roberts kicked it to the states, and the Congress, and they kicked it to the states, then North Carolina said, well, if that be the case, here's what we'll do. We'll take precincts off of college campuses. If that's the case, we'll start redrawing the lines. And in North Carolina, for example, Watts district is Greensboro to Charlotte. They cut off 25%. That district's gone. Congressman Clyburn, his district runs from Columbia to Charleston. They cut off 25%, he's out. We could lose half of our congressional and Senate and state legislators within the next 2 years unless we fight right now to stop any erosion of our voting rights by states. And what we wanted in 65 was overcoming states' rights control, Confederate controls of the government. So this is the moment that we need the constitutional right to vote affirmed in the Constitution. Second, given the amount of poverty in our country today, working poor people, 50 million Americans in poverty and 50 million almost there. What does that mean? It means people don't have a bank account. It means people have a low credit score and can't borrow. It means they cannot aspire to send their children to college. It means they live from check to check and sometimes no check, and they survive. People under those conditions can hardly grow and develop. But even from that pool of poverty-stricken people, whenever there are just and balanced opportunities, they make the best. You look at all these football players when the Washington team, I should dare not call them Redskins because that's so racist. But when the Washington team plays the Giants, and you have all these African Americans on the field, they come from very difficult circumstances. Many come from single-parent homes or no-parent homes, and yet they are the best in the world at what they do. What allows us to be the best on earth at football, basketball, baseball, boxing, and what's so hard to be the very best at? And that's because, Rock, whenever the playing field is even, no matter where you come from, when the field is even, rules public, goals clear, referees fair, and the score is transparent, we can make it. We can make it when the field is uneven. And that's really what civil rights is about, is fighting for an even playing field. There's nothing to suggest that we can't make it with an even playing field. But if we're playing football and one guy has to run 8 yards for first down, of course he inherited some yards. You got to run 12 yards because you single-parent household, you can't win the game. But if it's 10 yards for all first downs, we can make it.
Two things as we wrap up. What makes Jesse Jackson happy today? One. Two, what's Jesse Jackson gonna want said on his big old tombstone?
Well, what makes me happy, I believe in a few minutes going home to be with Jackie, with whom I've been married 51 years. That they go and listen to her do what she do and say what she's saying. I just sit there and look at her. I just get happy listening to her talk. She just be talking.
Even if she's fussing?
Well, that's all she be doing. I just be listening. But I just enjoy it. No, what I want to say over my grave, if I was in my casket and you got, I want you to say, he's getting up.
And because he fired up.
He getting up.
He can't take it no more.
He getting up.
The Right Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. Folks, we'll be back next Saturday, 9 to noon, on the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets. Thank you very much. Thanks to the live audience and those of you watching around the world. Next time, Saturday, 9 to noon. Check. Oh, okay. Audience, let me please thank you. You are part of our show, and you are absolutely fabulous. Thank you very, very much.